So what was the lowest moment now that we've been through, I think, was it 7 seasons of Kirby Smart at Georgia? What's been the one time that was the lowest moment? And I think it depends on how you categorize lowest. Because there's been a couple of examples of really tough losses in the time that Kirby Smart's been around. The crazy thing is that in Kirby's time at Georgia, he's just not had a lot of losses. When you start talking about 15 losses in a particular, you know, 7 year career, excuse me, yes, 7 full years at Georgia, that's not a lot of losses to kind of go over. Um, but I think the most painful loss was the loss to Alabama in the national championship game in 2017 season. I don't think there's really much question that that was the most painful. I don't know that that was the lowest moment. Um, to me, I immediately think about the loss in the Sugar Bowl to Texas, and and here's why I think that that was the at the time, sort of the lowest moment. I think you could go, by the way, I think you could go with a couple things. I think the Vanderbilt loss was pretty bad in 2016. To some degree, the South Carolina loss in 19, but that game didn't change anything. It showed in the 19 South Carolina loss, it showed that Georgia's offense from that point forward was going to be completely regressed. I mean, they regressed in it had regressed in every single way. They only scored 30 points, more than 30 points, one other time that season. That was against Georgia Tech, and they just did not play well in that game either. So that double overtime loss to South Carolina was tough. I also thought the loss to Florida in 2020 was a pretty rough one as well. But in terms of lowest point, I think it comes down to, and y'all correct me if you think I'm wrong, the Vanderbilt loss in the first season or the Texas loss in the third season. And because none of the other losses, when you look back again, this guy's lost 15 games in 6 years. That's not that many losses. When you think back about all of the losses, so at Ole Miss in his fourth game, I mean, the Tennessee loss in 16 was a like a shock to the system loss, but it wasn't something where people were going, "Oh my gosh, there's real problems here." That's not what that was. Um, but the Texas loss, Georgia had come off of a national championship run in 2017, and you know they just were that loss at the Sugar Bowl that year. They just were not there almost, and it was really a troubling sign. I thought for the Dogs. I remember talking to somebody after that game and asking them, is this a real problem? And they said no. But that was a bad loss. That was a loss to conclude the season as a 14 point favorite in that game. A year later, Georgia got off to a pretty good start, and then of course they win over Notre Dame, but they weren't the same team for a while there. In 17 and a lot of 18, they could score. Um, when you look at the beginning of the 18 season, 40 points, uh, all four of the first 5 games, they scored 40 points or more. And then they had a loss to LSU. They recovered kind of after that, but you know, against Texas, it just didn't look like Georgia at all. A lot of guys that played that season didn't play in that game, etc. Hey, speaking of which, make sure that you're picking up Double Dogs. If you get it today, you'll still get some confetti included in there. This is from the national championship game. I know a lot of people have been asking about that. If you've ordered, you're getting confetti. How long I will have the confetti, I couldn't say. I don't know. I thought I'd run out, and then I found a bag. So make sure you're picking up Double Dogs, and Dog Struction is still available. The Double Dogs will be out in late February, early March. I can't control it's at the printer. I've gone as fast as I can go. I don't think people understand that. The book was written after the national championship, so it's not like this has been just sitting waiting to print. It's original content. It's not like what you saw from the Athens Banner Herald or the AJC. So this is an original book, and it's a collector's item. Let me tell you. I remember leaving New Orleans, thinking that Georgia was in a little bit of trouble. And that to me was the lowest moment. The loss to Alabama in 20 was tough. The loss to Florida in 20 was tough. I think the loss to the Gators in 20, that was pretty bad too. Because Georgia had made a run 3 years in a row to the SEC championship game, and Florida beat them by 14 points that night, or 16 points, excuse me. I mean, Florida just was the better team. Certainly that day. By the end of the season, they were not. But Georgia was a mess at that point in the season. Stetson Bennett had not grown in a way that was productive for the program. He was having to learn how to be a starting quarterback, and it was ugly. The other thing too, about that moment in time, it was COVID was tough. I mean, it was tough, and that just I just can speak for myself, having been to all of those games. I mean, I was the only person that covered the team that went to all the games that Georgia played, all 10 of them. And everybody was at the Alabama game, and everybody was at the Florida game. But as time went on, the people on the beat lost interest. The people, the corporations that cover the team, they couldn't really justify sending people out to Missouri. That Florida game was what got you there into that moment was they couldn't still win the national championship. Any terminal loss in a season is a tough one. And it came a little bit later than usual because of the schedule and COVID and all that stuff. But that loss to Florida was pretty bad. And it showed to me that Georgia not only didn't have the answer at quarterback at the time, but that it was possible that Florida could go by them. I did not think that that was going to happen, and it did not. But um, it still was a that was a rough that was a rough loss for Georgia. I don't think it was the lowest. I do think Texas was the lowest. Um, this is pretty nuancy, to be honest with you. And the loss to Alabama in the SEC championship in 2001, that was tough too, but that was not the same thing. I mean, that was essentially to try to win a conference championship, have an undefeated season. But what color were you going to wear during the college football playoff? That was what that was. That led to a lot of soul searching, I think, um, for the Georgia Bulldogs heading into that. I mean, they did not play well that day, but they had another day to move forward. In 18, when Texas lost, Georgia lost to Texas, you saw guys leaving the field crying. I mean, it was a tough moment. I did not see that after Florida in 20 or um, you know Alabama in 21. Um, it wasn't there. So I think to me the important thing about that moment, though, what I wanted to say too, is it led to these moments. It led to, back-to-back national championships. Here's why. Um, the loss to Texas, Georgia's not lost a bowl game since. Okay, they beat Baylor in 19. They beat Cincinnati in 20. In 21, obviously, beating Michigan, and then decisive, and then beating Ohio State in the Peach Bowl in 22. Kirby and them made sure that that atmosphere that came around the bowl game at Texas with Texas, that wasn't going to happen again. They took notes. They were very diligent about what went wrong. I can confirm some of the things that they said they were going to do, they did the next year. If players were not going to play in the game, they weren't going to be there. And it wasn't going to be about, oh, I'm deciding. No, if you've not decided, you're out. So the the modern Georgia that we saw over time here, that was not the start of it, but that was an accelerator of it to be sure. Because you can separate Kirby's time at Georgia, I would say this way: the first season, the two years after that, playing in the SEC championship game and national championship game, and you could even say that you could say the first season, the Jake Fromm years, and then the COVID year, and then everything after that so far. So there are distinctive periods and eras of Kirby's time. I think the Texas loss was the toughest loss Georgia has had in terms of it being the quote lowest point. You tell me what you think the lowest point was in Kirby's time at Georgia so far on the field.